G'day friends, Scott Guide from Action RC here. It's been a minute since we unboxed and built the Shoemaker Cougar 2 Works Classic. I know I promised you a drive report too, but weather and RC media duties conspired to delay it until now. We'll get to that weather in a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. Jump over to the channel to find the original unboxing video and our build report on this re-release car from Shoemaker. I hope you enjoy those episodes and this drive story. And because it's always more fun to watch a race car, we'll stick with action photos and video from our test session rather than looking at me in the studio. Let's jump into it. F1 driver Lance Stroll asked at this year's pre-season test, how many laps of pre-season testing does it take to work out if your car is good? Answered, sometimes less than 5. Within 5 laps, he said, he'll know how likely it is that the team has met its performance and development targets, and a pretty fair idea what the car will be like in the upcoming season. Now, the early evidence for Aston Martin fans, it's not all that good. And after a rain-interrupted year, my local club at Chargers RC, a bunch of legends, by the way, in Brisbane, Australia, completed and officially opened a new dirt-surfaced vintage track. It's a track purpose-built for running vintage cars, so it's not too big, there's nothing really solid to hit, braking fragile and precious old cars, and there are no sizable jumps. And in Australian tradition at least, it's a low-grip dirt surface. It's very much the kind of track we were racing on back in the early 90s. The layout first, when it was put together, was based on the 97 World Champs track at the Ranch Pit Shop in California, shrunk to fit the available space, but later on modified a little bit to open up a longer, not long but longer, downhill front straight. All up, it's still a relatively low-speed, small, fun little track. And the first day we got on track, after a load of rain up and down the east coast of Australia, in the start of 2025, there were a stack of people there to sample its delights. I'd taken the Cougar 2 Works for a quick spin up and down the street to make sure everything worked, and then I threw it on track for a quick shakedown run before the race meeting got underway, just to figure out which way this brand new track went. I did a few laps, 6 or 7, to make sure it all worked, and then I threw the transmitter at Andy Nelson to drive while I filmed a few laps. Now, you might not know Andy, but what you need to know is that in the late 80s and early 90s, he was one of Australia's very best. He finished second to Masami Hirosaka at the Australian National Championships in 1988. It doubled as a world's warm-up at St Ives for the 1989 Worlds. He was that good. And in the early 90s, Andy raced with the Shoemaker factory squad, including at the 91 World Champs in Detroit, the race in which they ran the prototype Cougar 2. You could say that Andy had a hand in the testing and development of that original Cougar 2. So for me to see Andy wheel the car was pretty cool. And yes, he has his own Cougar 2 Works. Here's a shot of our two cars together. We're going to do battle on track all year with these bad boys. Now, what's this all got to do with Lance Stroll and pre-season F1 testing? Well, before we even made it back onto the track for our first qualifier that day, the rain that I said's been here all year returned. It rained and it poured and it flooded the pits, and we had no choice but to call it a day so that we didn't ruin the track and our cars. I guess that's the downside of dirt track racing. So here I am bringing you a track report based on, 6 or 7 laps on a track I've never driven before. How can that be valid? Well, the good news is I waited a couple of weeks, and after yet another rain-interrupted attempt, today we finally got an abbreviated club race in on this new track. So now it's not just 6 laps, but 3 whole battery packs. That's right, 2 qualifiers and a final. It still really doesn't seem enough for a truly in-depth track test, I guess. But I think there are some things that we can confidently say about this car. The first is this. I agree with Lance Stroll. You can pretty quickly get an idea of how a car feels, how it's balanced, how it will go as you get to work on the fine-tuning and driving it. And the Cougar 2 works straight out of the box, and you might recall I used no option parts in the build. With the tyres I chose for this surface was super fun. In Australia, we mainly run 21.5 brushless in vintage two-wheel drive, so the car was never going to be overpowered or stressed for traction. And it took precisely that first half dozen laps to know that this is going to be a great car to drive on the kinds of tracks that I grew up racing a Cougar 2 on back in the early 90s. It's well balanced. There's just a little hint of understeer mid-corner that we managed to dial out with a little tweak to front camber. It generated all the drive that we needed for the amount of horsepower that we had, and it coped well with the few small bumps in the surface and the slightly undulating nature of the track, which is probably hard to pick from the footage. Lance Stroll, after 5 laps, probably knew he and Aston Martin were in for a tough year. For me, after 5 laps, I knew this thing was a ripper. Now, the second thing, we don't actually take vintage racing all that seriously in Australia. I mean, sure, we race, don't get me wrong. We're all competitive, me as much as anyone. But we do actually tend to be more interested in the post-race chatter, the cool factor of the cars, and just hanging out with old mates. Even our biggest annual vintage race, the Vintage Bash, which this year will probably go over 400 entries, is more about the good times than the fast times. And in a setting like that, it hardly matters how the car feels on track. It much more matters how the car makes you feel when you're driving it. But for me, driving this car, the muscle memory kicked in, and it was all about opposite lock and sliding a nicely balanced rear motor buggy through the turns, kicking up roost and dust wherever I could find it. The Cougar 2 Works, in its re-released form, just makes me want to drive it, and to convince all my old mates that they need to find a vintage buggy, preferably a Cougar 2 Works, and come drive with me. It makes me feel like it's 1992, that life and RC racing are a little simpler and a little more innocent than sometimes it feels today. I actually don't know what more I could ask of a vintage re-release buggy than all of that. But of course, performance matters too, and on today's evidence, the Cougar 2 Works still has everything going for it that it had back in 92 or 93. I had a competitive day out. I raced wheel to wheel with cars of a similar vintage. On our low grip dirt track, it was every bit competitive right out of the box. It just felt so smooth to drive, perhaps the defining characteristic of the car on this track, and with the electronics I had on board, including that beautiful little Mark I servo that I told you about during the build review. Now, I'd like to be able to tell you the fairy tale story about a race win on debut, but the truth is, I caught a pipe on the second to last corner and I gave it away. I gave the win away. I had a fantastic day. It was wonderful racing wheel to wheel. We had a great time. So from that perspective, with all of 6 laps a couple of weeks ago, 3 packs today, and some trackside viewing of Andy Nelson behind the wheel for a few minutes, the start of this journey with the Cougar 2 Works Classic has been an overwhelming success. It's well balanced, it's easy to drive, it's really fun on our low grip track, and it put a huge smile on my face. What more, as I said before, could I want? I really like this car, if you can't tell, for the way that it feels to drive, for the way that it looks, and for the fact that it's a faithful reproduction of the original. Even the things that annoyed me in the first place, back in the early 90s, the gear cover, the single bearing front hubs, how hard it is to assemble those drive shafts, they've not been fixed. This car is new, but it's new just about as if it had rolled onto the track in late 1992. And for that I say to Shoemaker, kudos. It is actually hard to imagine you could have done a better job with re-releasing this car. Now, if you want stronger, faster, better, there are a load of option parts from Shoemaker and others that will improve the car no end. For me, actually, I think I'll add a better servo saver, and honestly, I'll be pretty happy with what I have. There are some strengthening parts available, and if you run, say, indoors on carpet or with high-powered motors, those high-grip conditions that the car probably wasn't really designed for, and we all know we can put a lot more power into these cars today than we ever could have in the early 90s. You might have a look at some of those parts, particularly the newly released rear bulkhead support. On my track, at the power levels we race at, with almost nothing to hit, there's no need for me to do any of that. And this car right out of the box is a pretty solid proposition. As well as giving kudos to Shoemaker, I want a big shout out to Marshy and Jeno and Sean and Trav, Dave, JP, the whole giant crew at Chargers RC in Brisbane, Australia. It's a great little vintage track they've built, and we are going to have some great laugh-filled Friday nights this year. I can't wait to be all in the middle of it with the Cougar 2 Works Classic. You know, one other thing that this car left me wanting is an answer to a question. When and where is the re-release of the Shoemaker Bosscat Works? Come on, Shoemaker, over to you. Bosscat works. That's what we want to see next. I can't wait to get my hands on one of those bad boys. I'll leave you with the rest of the footage I have from Chargers. Enjoy this purpose-built, old-school, small, slippery vintage track, or get yourself to Brisbane and come race with us. We hope to be back soon with another build and drive story. Until then, jump into your favourite podcast app and check out the Action RC back catalogue of amazing conversations. Everything from the whole history of RC right up to the modern day. Hope you enjoy those episodes. We'll see you here next time.
Driver 29.1. Cougar 42 boost. Brisbane 20.3. Unknown driver 25 flat. 82 Peter Square 17.6. Cougar 17.1. 777 Jason Myers.